welcome to Hard Talk India. At the May general elections, a handful of young Western-educated MPs, many of them with business backgrounds, made their debut in the Indian Lok Sabha. What are they like? And more importantly, how much of a change do they represent? Here to tell us is the Congress Party's 27-year-old MP from Bombay South, Milan Deora. Milan, it's not usual for 27-year-old Western-educated businessmen to enter politics. What made you do it?
Well, actually, cliched as it may sound, I'm a great follower of Plato, Aristotle, Plato, and some of these great political thinkers. And Plato had a quote once when he said, "The punishment of wise men who refuse to take part in the affairs of government is to be ruled by a government of unwise men." And I think that really sums up my reason for entering politics. I had seen politics for most of my life. My father's been a politician. He was mayor of Bombay when I was born. And I think one way of really bringing change in society, being patriotic, being nationalistic, really improving India, taking India forward, is politics. I personally believe that because I came from business background, I studied business like you said, I was involved in my family business, I had various stints in various corporates in India and abroad, and being in business, being in journalism, you can drive changes in the country, but politics really is the most effective tool to really bring about fundamental changes.
Interesting, because it also seems as if you were almost challenging yourself. Until you joined politics, one of your passions, I gather, was music and the guitar.
That's right.
You've now begun to challenge yourself almost with a Platonic type of principle.
Right. Well, I think I'll tell you about my background. I was always raised, my father, my parents, they always raised me that you should always have an independent source of income if you do decide to get into politics, and that's much of the way my father got into politics. So for me, I think I can speak about myself, being 27 years old, being Western educated. I think that the fundamental aim is, if people who have a source of income, if somebody who is really interested in getting into politics, not to make money, to be absolutely blunt, but really to do something good, then I think that's welcome. And that's the sort of the reason that drove me to enter politics.
But the interesting thing is, you're not alone. There are 3 or 4 others like you of your same age and background.
Right.
Is it just a coincidence that this has happened in May 2004? Or is the common factor the fact that all of you are sons of former Congress leaders? In a sense, you're stepping out in daddy's shoes.
Well, I think, Karan, you can't really look at it within the Congress framework. I think definitely the Congress party took an informed decision to give a lot of younger candidates a chance to contest at the highest legislative body. But it's happened across all parties, and we see some young MPs in the BJP. We see them in various other parties. So I think it's bound to happen, you know, because the statistic that keeps being thrown around, that 55% of India is under 25, it's bound to happen that this generation, this demographic, needs to be more adequately represented in Parliament.
So there is in fact a sense in which a change, a real change, is taking place in Indian politics, and you're at the forefront of it.
Well, I think so. I think a change is taking place in politics, and I think not just 27-year-old MPs who are getting into politics, but I think we're seeing businessmen enter politics, maybe through the Rajya Sabha route. And there are various others who are showing interest. Back in Mumbai as well, recently I read about a fashion designer who's entering politics. So I think it's become, it has always been perceived as probably a dirty profession. It's always been perceived as not everyone's cup of tea, but that's changing. There are a lot more people from diverse backgrounds getting interested in politics, and I welcome that. I think that's great.
Let's talk about the profession. You've just been an MP now for 4 months. You've seen your full first session of Parliament. What was the experience like? Was it disillusioning, or did it live up to your expectations?
Well, I think my first 4 months in Parliament haven't been encouraging. I think I can see how people have been disenchanted, disillusioned, disappointed with the political system. But I think personally for me, that sort of re-establishes my ideals. It re-establishes the reason I got into politics. It reinforces those ideals. I think what has happened in the last few months, I don't want to use this platform or this forum to really achieve political gains and attack the opposition, but I think it's really come down to trivialization of politics, and it's come down to really trivializing the highest legislative body in this country.
But can you now, in a sense, understand better the contempt that many people outside politics feel for the profession?
Well, I didn't need 4 months to understand that. I was always aware of that, and that's one of the reasons that motivated me to get into politics. And when we speak about this large demographic of youth, interestingly, in my campaign, I have an urban area. I would go around meeting various college students. I would campaign largely in colleges. And when I would talk to some of these students, ask them, why aren't you interested in politics? Forget about entering politics. Why not in just going out and casting your vote, your most fundamental basic right? they kept echoing the same sentiment, which is that why should we vote? It's the same thing. Whoever we vote for, there's no difference in the candidate. So people have this impression about politicians, which I think we as politicians, myself, maybe we can change, but public apathy isn't going to help either. So it's really a combination of both. We need the public to work together. They need to actually show more interest. They need to get involved. Getting into politics is one extreme, but actually going out and casting your vote is the most basic way of getting involved in the political process.
But you know, it's one thing to want to actually get in and change it from the inside and to realize that if you don't participate, you're going to be ruled by fools. But it's another to actually make a difference. You're only 27. As far as politics is concerned, you're inexperienced. In fact, your experience of life itself must be pretty minimal. Do you really believe that you could make a difference?
Well, I don't think I can make a difference individually. I'm not saying I have all the answers to all the hard questions, but I think that if I'm not saying, again, youth is an advantage. I never campaign on the basis that I'm 27 years old, so please vote for me. I believe that...
Is it a disadvantage?
I don't think it's a disadvantage at all.
Not even in a country like India?
No, not at all. And because I have this majority of the population behind me, and I'm not saying I represent this entire population, but I think that we shouldn't look at politics, we shouldn't look at parliament or any other legislative body in the country as not representing well enough this demographic. We shouldn't say that 55% of the country is under 25 or 60% under 30, and therefore that similar amount should be the case in a parliament. I don't think that's true. I think proportional representation is not the issue here. The issue is that are our senior leaders, our experienced leaders, are they adequately addressing the needs, the aspirations of this demographic? That's far more
Absolutely true,
important.
and that is certainly one of the most fundamental concerns that people feel. But before I come to that, let me touch on something else. India is a largely rural agrarian country. 26% of the country lives below the poverty line. 36% is actually technically illiterate. Where does a westernized businessman with an urban upbringing fit in?
Well, one is I come from an urban constituency. I think you're absolutely right that almost more than 2/3, 70% of our population relies on the agricultural economy, the rural economy. But things are changing. People are moving to urban areas. The shift towards urban areas is increasing. I think one thing about education, because you mentioned a management degree, one very general broad statement that I'd like to make is, you look at anyone, you talk to a historian, you talk to someone who studied English, you talk to someone who studied math, what is missing in their education is management. And I'm not saying business therefore is a prerequisite to good politics, to effective politics, but as a business graduate, you immediately are taught management, you're taught about working in groups, you're taught to build consensus with groups.
And that's an asset in politics.
I think that's a very important asset in politics, especially in coalition politics, especially in working with people, actually understanding different opinions, bringing them to the table, building consensus. That's a very, very effective tool in politics. So if I can bring an element of that into it, I think that's a good sign.
Okay, let's come to the issue you were talking about a moment ago, the sense that many people in politics who are considered leaders are viewed by voters, and particularly by that 75% that is under the age of 35, as if they were only there for the sake of power, as if they were opportunists feathering their own nest. How do you overcome that perception?
Well, as I said, I'm not saying all politicians are great. I'm not saying all politicians have problems. I think there are, I won't say a few bad apples spoil the whole bunch, but maybe a lot of bad apples spoiling the bunch. But I think you can't be apathetic. And I would keep saying this, I would keep reiterating this point during my campaigning, that if you just sit back and say, I don't want to take part in the political process, then you're going to lose. You have to get involved. I think if myself, if some of my colleagues, not just in the Congress party, across all parties, if we can sort of play a catalytic role in bringing more people into politics, younger people into politics, educated people into politics, I think we have a lot going for this country.
Quite right. The more the young come into politics, the more politics in India will change. But the big question that is still not answered is, what are they there for? Would you accept that perhaps the big difference, the distinguishing feature in the great leaders of the last century, be it the Margaret Thatchers or the Ronald Reagans, the Nehrus or the Churchills, was their convictions, their beliefs? Would you accept that?
Sure, but I think that's still present today, and I think that you know, it's not fair to look at it as young parliamentarians and elder parliamentarians. I think a great thing is the merger of the two, the energy, the dynamism that the youth brings in with the experience, the wisdom that the elderly politicians have. If we can merge the two, which I see happening in Parliament, I think that's great. And you spoke about conviction, you spoke about various leaders. India has its history of people who had a strong sense of conviction, who really led the country. And I
But
think
isn't that
still-
the problem?
I think
Those are
that's
now
still present
part of
today.
history.
I think that's still present today. I think in the present tense, in the present scenario,
Do people have convictions today?
we have great leaders who do have conviction. Yes, I'm completely confident. I'm not pessimistic about politics. I'm very optimistic about it. I think today there are great leaders in this country, and I think that they can inspire a lot of new leaders to actually come into the forefront and sort of work with those convictions in mind.
Let's develop for a moment this issue of convictions, because to many people it's convictions that determine what sort of politician you are, and beyond that, what impact you have on the country. What are your convictions? What do you stand for?
Well, I stand for commitment to my constituency. I stand for commitment to my nation. I think
But
there's a
forgive me,
quote-
doesn't every MP stand for that?
Well, I think every MP would say that, but how many of them really believe in that?
Oops, that's a terrible thing, isn't it?
Well, I like to quote one person, Lyndon Johnson, and this was not when he was President of America, but when he was a senator. He once said, he says, I'm a free man, an American, a United States senator, and a Democrat in that order. And I think to some extent that's my philosophy in politics. So if I can...
So you're an Indian, a congressman, and an MP in that order?
Indian, an MP, and a congressman in that order.
Okay, but what does this particular Indian stand for? What's his vision of India? Why are you in politics if you haven't got a vision that you want to achieve?
Well, my vision is no different from any other 27-year-old's vision, which is really to see India as a developed superpower, whether we look at it as 20 years, 50 years down the line. Now, how we go about that, that's where you actually look at your vision, that's where you actually bring in your execution skills, the implementation abilities. And I think that what I would like to see within the political system, what's my vision, what's my real sort of wish list, is to get people to stop being apathetic towards politics and towards the political system.
You mean more involvement will make the difference?
I think more involvement will make a significant difference. and I
Even if
think
that is involvement only for the sake of involvement shorn of beliefs and convictions?
I think actually getting up, making a change, not sitting back and complaining. You know, South Mumbai actually has the sort of the highest percentage of the affluent class of India. And it in many ways does not represent a lot of India. Like you said, 70% of the country is based on agriculture. But often, a lot of the people who criticize the political system, a lot of the people who criticize political leaders, on election day, they're the ones who go out and play golf or take a holiday and sit at home. So I think that apathy is a major problem. If we can get rid of that apathy, get people into the system, that's what we need.
You're talking at the moment about overcoming the apathy of the 20% that sit in golf clubs and don't vote. What about the 70% who tend to be ignored by that 20%? Let's in a sense talk about the litmus test issues of our time. For instance, do you as a young MP believe that reservations in the private sector are an important way of tackling and fulfilling the aspirations of scheduled caste youth and scheduled tribe youth?
Well, I think the issue of reservation is one tool in my opinion, and I think
An important one?
I think it's an important one. I think that a debate needs to take place on to what extent do you go with reservation. Should someone who's been benefiting from reservation up to standard 10, should it end there? Should it go on till jobs? I think that's a debate we need to have. And
But it sounds as if that the principle of reservations in the private sector is one that you're in agreement with.
No, I'm saying that the idea of affirmative action is very important. Affirmative action simply means reverse or positive discrimination, and I think that needs to happen. But we need to be careful when we take part, when we sort of actually implement affirmative action, that reverse discrimination doesn't become reverse discrimination, which comes back to just discrimination all over again.
In other words, yes, we need to do something to help them,
But
we
reservation
need
is
to
one
think
tool.
about it.
Reservation is one tool, and I think that one area where a lot of parties are coming together on, and I think there's no difference from the Congress's agenda, the UPA's agenda, or the NDA or the BJP's agenda, all have spoken about reservation in the private sector that needs to be debated. They've all been very categorical about it, that actually the government must sit with the private sector, they must form some sort of agreement.
I mean, a debate is essential in any democracy, in fact in any society.
Sure.
But Milan Deora's position on that debate is that some form of affirmative action is necessary.
I completely believe so. I think that there are...
What about the counter-argument that this would affect quality, it would affect merit? That's the sort of argument that your 20% constituency in Bombay South would put up. What would you say to them?
Well, again, that's if we had reservation in the private sector. Depends on what kind of reservation. I personally believe that reservation for Dalits, for backward caste people who've suffered for many years, they've been neglected by the system, they've been excluded from the system. I think for them to get back, to create a level playing field, reservations are important. But again, I come back to the point that one could argue that beyond the 12th grade, should reservation be applicable or not? Some might say that give it to them to primary education, let them get a start, let them create that level playing field, and after that they're on their own.
The other big issue that is almost a test of our times is the question of economic liberalization. The Manmohan Singh government for many seems to be a little weak on the subject. Even the issue of foreign investment in areas like telecom and civil aviation is under question. Your father was a great champion of economic liberalization. Are you?
Sure, I completely believe in economic liberalization, and I think I disagree with you that I don't think that this government is falling behind in economic liberalization.
Is that a congressman speaking, or is that Milan Deora?
It's Milan Deora speaking. I completely believe that with Dr. Manmohan Singh in the forefront, leading this government is going to go ahead with economic reforms. I think that there's a debate in the last 4 months in terms of what is economic reform, what is liberalization, and I think the previous government had it wrong. I think simply disinvesting PSUs, simply privatizing PSUs and calling that economic liberalization, calling those economic reforms is absolutely wrong. I come from South Bombay. I have the Bombay Stock Exchange headquartered in my constituency. I think reforms in the stock market, allowing more freedom but tightening the regulator, tightening SEBI. I think banking reforms, allowing banks to seize collateral assets of defaulters. Those are real economic reforms. Those will put us at par with the global economy. And if we look at a country like China, today one of China's fundamental flaws is availability of capital, the high amount of NPAs in the banks. So clearing up those, allowing banks, giving them that fiscal, that capability to actually go up and clean up their balance sheet. Those are examples of economic reforms, not simply going out and disinvesting PSUs in a very, very non-transparent manner, that too.
Now, you've lived and studied in America. Is that a country that you look up to and admire?
Well, I learned a lot in America, and I just returned from a US trip, Indo-US Parliamentary Forum trip, where there were several MPs, a multi-party delegation, and it was in some sense a homecoming for me, going back, meeting a lot of my friends and colleagues. I think Indo-US relations, if that's what you're asking me, I think Indo-US relations are really evolving, and I think they've evolved much more than what they were not only 40 years ago, but even 10 years or 5 years ago. And I got that sense today. Can I interrupt there? Sure.
Many people in India traditionally misunderstand America and often misunderstand American motives. Do you, as someone who admires the country and has lived there, see yourself as a person who can interpret America back to Indians and help them understand it better?
Sure. I hope I can be a conduit in that regard. But I see your point that a lot of people do misunderstand America, and I think that's because of the sort of pre-Cold War hangover that people still tend to have. But things have changed rapidly. And
rapidly?
I think so. And I think that
are changing.
I think that today, with India becoming an economic superpower in its own right, with the boom in ITs and services sector, where really Indians today are proud of themselves. Indians today go out on the global scenario, on the global platform, and they say, we're proud of our strong inherent capabilities in a particular sector in the economy. And I think Americans are recognizing that. During my recent trip, many times people kept reiterating that point, that they're not looking at us vis-a-vis our neighbor in the east or our neighbors in the west.
The changes happen both ways.
Absolutely, and India is increasingly being perceived as a standalone entity, a strong strategic, military and economic ally for the United States.
I see in front of me a young, individualistic, thinking MP. Let me put this to you. How do you respond to the complaint made, admittedly by many non-congressmen, that the one thing about the Congress party that puts them off is its dependence upon a single family?
I think this is a great example of the BJP's, the opposition's political rhetoric, and I think it's a great example of the hypocrisy in many ways, because I remember during my campaign, many times my BJP opponent would keep saying, this is an example of dynastic politics. And if you're talking within that context, dynastic politics is really a global phenomenon. It's not only limited to the Congress, it's very much prevalent in the BJP.
But is it acceptable in a democracy, regardless of whether it happens in all parties in India or maybe even in other countries as well?
Well, I think, Karan, look at it this way. I mean, it's not only in a developing country, in a democracy in a developing country that we see it. It's in our neighbors in the East. We see it in the United States. Today, President Bush, his brother is the governor of Florida. His father was the former president of the United States. Bill Clinton was the president of the United States. His wife is a senator.
You're cleverly finding similarities in other countries to buttress the fact that it happens in India. But do you not accept that many people who otherwise would have a lot of affinity with the Congress party are put off by its dependence on dynasty?
Not at all. I think that, as I said, that I think dynasty, it's not something that we can only address within the framework of the Congress party. But dynastic politics, in my opinion, in a democracy, firstly, there's only a minority of politicians in India in all parties who have some sort of political background. The vast majority of this country in terms of politics, the polity, are people who've started on their own and continuously are evolving and starting on their own.
Except that those who get to the top usually do so because of relationships, their sons, their daughters, their brothers of someone important.
That's not entirely true. I don't agree with that. I think there are various...
I mean, you've had 3 prime ministers in your party who have clearly been grandfather, daughter, and then grandson.
Well, you know, let me put it very bluntly. Who's to judge this? Because in the end, when the public goes out and casts its vote and they give a particular party or a particular individual their mandate, who's a better judge than the public? And who's a better... In democracy, they're the best judge. So if they believe that dynastic politics is not a problem, if they believe the person who's come in spite of a political background, is committed to actually serving this nation, that's all that matters.
How do you see your own future? Are you in politics now for the foreseeable future, or is this something that you're only doing for now and you might branch out later into something else?
No, I'm in when I took a decision to get into politics, it's in for the long term. And
you mean from 27 to 77, you're going to be an MP?
Well, I hope I'll be an MP, but I've decided to be in politics, and that's a decision. I think, as I said, politics is one vehicle, but I've decided to serve my country, and I think politics is the most effective vehicle which I come back to. But I'll continue being a businessman. I'll continue...
and will there be no conflicts between the two?
I don't think so. I think that having my own business, my own source of income, independent source of income, will allow me to be much more flexible in politics. I won't have to be in politics for...
Will it also keep you incorruptible?
I hope so. I
hope so?
No, I hope. I'm not saying that I will definitely be incorruptible in politics. That's my aim and my goal. But I think that having your independent source of income does do that, because actually not getting into politics for one fundamental reason of making money, which a lot of politicians do, I believe, I think that will go a long way in that.
And also having an independent source of income keeps a foot in the real world.
Sure. And you know, in my constituency in Mumbai, which is really the commercial capital of this country, I think it really does help, because the industry I'm in, we have interest in manufacturing, in trading, in finance, and it really does sort of keep my finger on the pulse of what's happening within industry, and that allows me to actually debate things, legislation in Parliament, which once Parliament comes back and reconvenes. So it does sort of keep your finger on the pulse of things.
Milind Deora, a pleasure having you on the program.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.